Welcome everyone to another Massachusetts Peace Action webinar. And you are in for a treat tonight because our featured speaker is Professor Adolph Reed. We're going to be hearing from a lot of different voices, hopefully including yours. But at the top of these, I do like to give a little plug for our organization here, Massachusetts Peace Action. We are the largest grassroots peace organization in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and part of the Peace Action Network with affiliates, sister affiliates all across the country. And what we do is we fight the evil of militarism. We fight to end wars. We fight to prevent wars. We fight to shrink the military budget and move that money to human needs that are desperately needed at home. Our core issue that we started on way back in the first iteration in 1957 is abolishing nuclear weapons. We are working to link militarism and climate change because all that money that we're spending on the war machine is money that we're not spending to protect our environment. We work on so many different issues. And we are truly a grassroots organization. We are volunteer and activist powered, and we want your participation. So please, you can head over to masspeaceaction.org, and I'll also send that link in the follow-up. And you can sign up, become part of our organization, because we know that it's going to take organizing and a mass movement to make meaningful change in this country, right? It's not what you do on election day, although that's important, but it's what you do every day. It takes a movement to make change. But that's enough from me. Let's introduce the program because I know you're all here to hear from Professor Adolph Reed. So thanks for joining us for Race, Class, and the Threat of Authoritarian Neoliberalism in the United States. It's going to be a great program. We know that we're dealing with a dangerous time right now in American politics. A lot is going on. We are in a moment right now. Dangerously rising authoritarianism, if not directly fascist movements, are growing in power. And the threat of nuclear war, even according to the establishment, has never been greater since 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some very authoritative forces are saying it's even more dangerous than that moment. So that's where we are. And to analyze it and to give us all of the solutions, I'm just kidding. We're joined by Professor Adolph Reed Jr. It's an honor to have you with us. Just a bit of information on Dr. Reed, if you don't know him yet. He is the Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania, and he specializes in the studies of issues of racism and U.S. politics, and also class issues, of course. He's the author of many books, including The Jesse Jackson Phenomenon, The Crisis of Purpose in Afro-American Politic, The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives, and his most recent publication, and correct me if I'm wrong, is No Politics But Class Politics. And he also has a podcast called Class Matters, which I think has 14 episodes that are available.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor and the mic over to you, Professor Adolph Reed.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who has turned up. I hope you can hear me. I have a brand new desktop computer, so I'm not exactly certain how well all the attachments are working. And I'm since we have food for a lively discussion, I'm not going to talk very long. I'm going to try to maybe hit some key themes that we can pick up on in a discussion among the panelists and then the general group. I'd like to start out with what seems like a conundrum that I've often referred to, and it's one that's enunciated by Professor Willie Leggett in South Carolina. He's also a political scientist and an old friend and comrade, who famously, and I've often said if there were a Nobel Prize or Pulitzer for apothegms, this one would win. That the only thing that hasn't changed about Black politics since 1965 is how we think about it. So I want to leave that apothem out there for a second, and then um, and then say a little bit about why I think that has come to be the case. And what I want to do is first to take a little ride in the Wayback Machine back to the end of World War II, when a key moment for me is like 1944, and trust me, I'm not going to do a walkthrough from 1944 until 2024. But in 1944, FDR enunciated the Second Bill of Rights, right? The New Deal, liberal, labor, left coalition had made its sort of deepest penetration into the mainstream of American politics, to the extent that a real full employment bill, a bill that would have made full employment the cornerstone of national economic policy, and would have mandated that the executive branch and also Congress target um, full employment as a central goal of domestic public policy, to the extent that that the federal government would be committed to enact positive interventions in a macroeconomy, up to and including massive public works jobs programs to bring unemployment down to a reasonable full employment target. That bill actually passed the Senate in 1945. It was defeated in the House. And what we got instead was the relatively toothless Employment Act of 1946. The Murray-Wagner-Dingell Act was what was being debated in Congress, which would have expanded the Social Security program to like generate a national, a real national health care for the U.S. and other comparable initiatives. Well, what happened was that business had come out of the war. So I'll back up a second, but I promise I won't go on too many digressions. In the American Academy, there's it's more than a cottage industry, or there has been more than a cottage industry of explaining why the U.S. didn't develop social democratic institutions like West and Central European counterparts. And there are all kinds of answers that social scientists and historians give: ethnicity, American political culture, whatever. But there's one very simple explanation, and this has to do with the point I was getting ready to make a minute ago, that capitalist classes in Europe came out of the war weakened and discredited by their associations with fascism. The American capitalist class came out of the war rehabilitated, and there were terms and there are facets of the way that the terms on which class struggle was fought out during the war that sort of complicate the stuff from our side too, assuming our side isn't the business side, that is to say. But they came out of the war and went on a full-bore offensive against labor and the left. And this is the first point of intersection with domestic policy and American foreign policy in those 80 years, right? Because Cold War, I mean, this was the moment in which the Cold War was declared and created, right? And its functions were as much domestic as they were international, right? It's a matter of creating space for American imperialism abroad and building American empire, but also for curtailing left-leaning inclinations in American politics. race connects with this too, right? Interestingly enough, right? Because and scholars like Risa Goluboff, who's a legal scholar, and a former grad at advisee of mine, Leah Gordon. I was second or third person on her committee. She teaches at Brandeis now. She's an historian of education. But in a wonderful book called From Power to Prejudice, which is the study of the retreat of civil rights politics from political economy and from class in in the late 40s and late 50s, it also demonstrates how the objectives, right, from the mid 30s through the end of the 40s and even later, what we think of as Black activism or the Black freedom struggle, or whatever you want to call it, was in an historically specific moment, right, of sort of popular front leftism, right, where the struggle for racial democracy, which is just pursuit of um, radical application of the ideals of equality of opportunity, and social democracy, which is the redistributive politics that we know, converged. Preston Smith, who's a political scientist over at Mount Holyoke, has done the most important work on this period and the tension between these two objectives of tension and convergence of these two objectives of racial democracy and social democracy. And this convergence persists sort of through the 50s and into the 60s, right? But what starts happening in the late 40s, at the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s, is partly under Cold War pressure, partly under the inducement of carrots, which we can talk about later if anybody wants to. The social democratic tendency in Black political activity goes on a retreat, right? And by the time we win the major victories in the mid 60s, the social democratic tendency is kind of, I wouldn't say it's exactly squashed, but it certainly gets displaced by a racial, or by the post-war racial liberalism that had become dominant over the 50s, right? So by this point, what were the big victories that are won in the 50s and 60s, and especially in the 60s, 1964 Civil Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, 1968 Fair Housing Law. We get established a Black a Black politics as it's generally understood to be. That's more like an ethnic pluralist politics at the local level, and becomes increasingly integrated into Democratic Party machine politics from the local level to the national level. So one way to think about this is we've got what everyone thinks of as a Black politics, and thinks of it as being connected to a history of militants, but it's basically been de-radicalized and worked into mainstream Democratic Party politics. And as that politics evolves into what we would eventually come to think of as neoliberalism, the Black politics evolved along with it, right? And this is and this turn is a turn that my son, Touré Reed, who, keeping in Massachusetts, was a Hampshire College graduate, described in his most recent book as race reductionism. Right? His book is called Toward Freedom. All right. So, I mean, here we are. We've got an understanding of Black politics that's increasingly a class-based endeavor, right? It's no accident, for instance. So, like, people make a lot of noise about how Clinton, or both Clintons and Joe Biden were involved in producing mass incarceration like in the early 90s. But we tend to forget that two-thirds of the Congressional Black Caucus voted for those crime bills, and that polls showed a lot of popular support among Black Americans for the crime bills too. And part of what had set the stage for this along the way was the proliferation of underclass ideology over the 80s and into the 90s that that basically reasserted old cultural poverty ideology from the 60s that insisted that the way to overcome poverty is not through jobs and investment and programs of redistribution, but through fixing what was allegedly wrong with the poor people. And then that produces like a new class role for the Black professional and managerial strata, of which was like speaking for and overseeing the rehabilitation of a disreputable underclass. That gets us, and I'm telescoping a lot here, and I'll shut up in a couple of minutes. But I mean, that gets us, among other things, to the point of 2015, and frankly, since then, when neoliberal and corporate Democrats have been able to count on the active engagement of the Black political class as a counter to a political left, or to the emergence of a political left in the mid 2010s, right around the Sanders campaign, for instance. All right, so I'll stop with that part of it, but I'll speak to Professor to Legette's conundrum and assert that the reason that the only thing that hasn't changed about Black politics since 1965 is how we think about it and talk about it, is that the Black political elites who have access to the public microphone are committed to a notion that racism has to be understood as the source of any kinds of inequalities or problems that affect Black people, and as a custodial role that element plays in shaping what we understand to be the Black agenda, right? And we can see it clearly. I mean, the wealth gap, for instance. I've often said there's no such thing as a racial wealth gap because there's no such thing as black wealth, and there's no such thing as white wealth. There's wealth that's owned and controlled by people who are Black and people who are white, but there's no collective racial pot of Black wealth. And I've often pointed out that I know we're all accustomed to thinking of Black people as speaking with one voice and wanting the same thing, such that another Oscar for Ava DuVernay or another $1 billion to Oprah is supposed to make us all better in some way. So driving this point home might be a little simpler if we were to imagine the white wealth side of the continuum. So I've suggested that, thought experiment, take a registered nurse, an RN, but a member of the MNA, for instance, who's lost their job for whatever reason and is on the verge of foreclosure or eviction. Can we imagine that there's some pot of collective racial white wealth that she can appeal to get a short-term loan to help her make her mortgage? Or that she can, if she can find out which one of Elon Musk's houses he is occupying for the weekend, to go to his house with a coffee cup and ask for some money. Well, no, of course not. It makes no sense. And it takes us wondering then, well, why should we imagine that it doesn't work that way for Black people? Why should we imagine that when Jim Clyburn, for instance, says that it's irresponsible uh, for Bernie Sanders to tell or to say that we should have national health care and free public higher education because nothing in America is free. Why should we imagine that that's a racially legitimate position and like not another um, um, democratic representatives who is beholden to a different class? How that connects with the real imperative, or I think the greatest imperative that faces us in the U.S. at this moment, between now and November. Obviously, the climate crisis and the threat of full-scale war are greater dangers to us overall. But I've been saying for some time now too. We may very well be, and it's not just true here. It could be true like in much of the rest of the world. Certainly seems to be true in Central and even Western Europe. It may be that neoliberalism, as we think of it, has reached a point now where it can no longer deliver enough um, security or material benefits to enough of the population to maintain its legitimacy as a nominally democratic order. And if that is the case, then it's kind of like we may have run into a T intersection where there are only two directions to go, and one is to the right, which is toward uh, um, authoritarianism land, and we can quibble over what counts as fascist and what doesn't. I'm not especially interested in that, but if someone else is, we can. Or to the left, which would be in the direction of something like the social democratic agenda. In 2020 or after 2020, it looked for a minute as though the Biden administration may have been chastened enough, at least to try to give working people, make enough gestures toward the working people to keep the fascist threat at bay. And but it's gone only so far. And while the Biden presidency has been more successful, from our point of view, again, on domestic issues than the three Democratic administrations before it. That's really not saying a hell of a lot, since from the standpoint of the working people's interests, we arguably got more from Richard Nixon than we got from Carter, Clinton, or Obama. But the point is that we don't have what it takes to turn the tide, and I think that's true, like on the international front as well. And I think one of the problems with whatever the formations are that have occupied the space that a left would occupy in the U.S. if there were one, for the last 40 years, we haven't had the capacity to have any significant impact on changing the terms of public debate, right? And I think that's shown up in a lot of corrosive features of what have come to be understood as normal left practice. I'll leave that for later, or maybe not at all. But where we are now, politically speaking, is the only thing we can hope to do is kick the can down the road for 4 years, and then hope that we can use the 4 years to do the kind of deep and broad organizing that we need to start to build the kind of movement that we have to combat the fascist threat here as well as all over the world. So, I mean, I'll stop there. What I've talked is I've talked at least as long as I've wanted to talk. I mean, consider me done for the moment. And I hope it was reasonably coherent.
Oh, it certainly was. Thank you for those opening remarks. And I am going to resist the urge, at least for now, to ask you a question, because I'm going to bring up my co-host for this evening, Dr. Tony Vandermeer, who is a senior lecturer at the Africana Studies Department here at the University of Massachusetts here in Boston. and he is also a member of the board of directors at Massachusetts Peace Action. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome, Professor. You sparked a lot of questions, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of engagement around a lot of what you have said. But one of the things that was sticking out to me is when you mentioned Jim Clyburn.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately started thinking about Booker T. Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Right.
And thinking about, the debate and particularly the Du Bois, sort of had with him in terms of, his particular role in terms of, how should Black people move and so forth. But more importantly, when I go back and I look at the first civil rights amendments, the Reconstruction amendments,
Mm-hmm.
The question to me comes, what happened? What happened? Here
Mm-hmm.
you are, you had these amendments that said that, we were citizens, we had, the right to, we were citizens, the right to vote and so forth. If that was the case, how is it that we're here now, almost going beyond that point, back
Mm-hmm.
to sort of new slavery to a certain extent? And it's just not a question of Black people going into slavery in a sense, because the question is in terms of how do white people also understand their status, and this goes to the class question, how they see themselves in terms of not being able to go to Elon Musk and ask him to help pay that mortgage.
Right.
So it seems that I'm going a little back even
Mm-hmm.
further in saying
Yeah.
is that like we're going way, 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 way back, even to the point of enslaved African people. To the point is that what kind of rule were they under? And so now that we have a Black woman who could possibly be the president now, what does all that mean in terms of how we address the inequities in the society and create
Mm-hmm.
policies that's to create fairness for all of us? And I know that was, a lot, but
No. Yeah.
you sparked a lot of thought and a lot of questions. I have a lot of other questions, but maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, sure. Um, yeah, well, that's especially interesting because just today, actually, I've been writing about that 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 period, right, between 1866 and 1900. Um, and and you're right, of course. I mean, the Reconstruction amendments conferred citizenship on freed slaves, full citizenship, and it also created a national citizenship for the first time, right? Uh, and um, and there's an historian named Michael R. West, who was at Holy Cross, by the way. He did a great book called "The Education of Booker T. Washington," and West examines this point and makes a really powerful argument that when Northern Republicans didn't need support from Black voters anymore, and were prepared and had found a way to unite with the ruling class in the South, um, and to turn over, as it were, administration of the Negro and the Negro problem to Southern elites. Um, the conundrum that they faced was that Blacks were now citizens. So how do you justify you're denying citizenship rights to people who were very clearly by Constitution citizens? And the genius of that moment, which Washington, West argues, created by instantiating it, is a reformulation of the issue from what I just said to a problem of defining race relations, right? So the question then becomes, how do the races relate? Um, and, and and of course it's striking, right, that we still use the phrase race relations to express whatever the hell is supposed to be expressing, because there's no such thing as race relations. Races can't relate, right? In the first instance, because there are no races, right? But secondly, like if you want to say that the social existence is such that you can use race as a kind of shorthand, how can you talk about races relating to each other, right? And the category of Negro leader emerges within the discourse of race relations, so that the Negro leader is the person who is anointed by people in power to be the spokesperson for the civically mute Black population. And recall, it made sense in 1895 because of disfranchisement. I mean, Black people in the South, which is where most Black people were indeed civically mute, right? So the space is there for that stratum. That stratum is the same stratum, basically. And see, this goes back to the why people insist that nothing has changed since 1865 point. Because what has changed since 1865 is that the Black professional and the managerial strata, and not only they by any means, but have become much more seamlessly integrated into the normal functioning of American capitalist society, up and down, right? Clyburn isn't like an errand boy, right? Right. I mean, he's not um, the shoeshine boy for the DNC. He's a significant player in the DNC. All these Black mayors and congresspeople and corporate heads and stars and the entertainers and the rest of them depend on insisting that nothing has changed since 1865. I mean, obviously, anybody who's been alive since 1965 knows that things are different, right? That a lot has changed. But the ideological commitment that lies behind the nothing has changed contention is to enforce the notion that race is the driving determinant of the status of all Black people, like in America, and if not all, the vast majority of them, or even when it's only the vast majority of them, like by equating, Trayvon Martin's being killed by a vigilante and Oprah Winfrey being denied her right to buy a $38,000 handbag through the medium of something called trauma, right, is a class program, right? It's a class project, right? It's a project that and we can see this from my old friend Sandy Darity on the reparations front, that the racial wealth gap becomes, since 3/4 of so-called Black wealth is owned by the richest 10% of Black people, and 3/4 of so-called white wealth is owned by the richest 10% of Black people or white people, then the racial wealth gap is a problem that exists almost entirely between the richest Black people and the richest white people. And the response to it then, to closing the racial wealth gap, means closing the gap between rich white people and rich Black people. And what other Black people are supposed to get from that is something like a racial trickle down that depends on the same kind of racialist arguments that predominated, at the end of the 19th century, and also were rehearsed through underclass ideology, because so underclass ideology comes to ground Black American politics in the late 1980s, when Reaganism has made clear that no material redistribution that would have a significant impact on Black workers was going to be forthcoming. And the beauty of understanding the problem of the nominal underclass, which is also a fiction, as being basically behavioral or culture or linked to cultural pathologies, then you not only assigns the Black professional and managerial strata the same role that they had under Bookerite politics, but 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 suggests the same kind of moral trickle down, right? That somehow, when it's Black people, well, like the trickle down doesn't look as dubious as it does when it's applied to the macro economy, and that also depends on persisting racial caricatures about Blacks, and by the way, I mean caricatures coming from the nominal left as 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 well as from the right. So I don't know if that gets at all
Yeah.
of it. I hope it is most of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And I think, what I'm also hearing is, it's almost like, how do we begin to describe phenomena in a way? But still, even let's look at what's happening with Kamala at this moment,
Hmm.
as a woman, but also as a Black
Right,
woman.
right,
And the kind of barriers that she's trying to dodge, and that she's
right.
even talking about herself
Hmm.
about, I mean, she mentioned on what program, she says, and she was using metaphors, but she says, when they close the door, and they said, you have to kick the fucking door down.
Right.
But she's talking about, she's talking about, I don't even get to the question of colorism, but she's really referring to race as a
Hmm.
person who is supposedly accomplished, you know,
Hmm.
as
Right,
an attorney general in California, as a vice president, now as a president
right,
candidate, people saying that she's unqualified around
right.
that. So you're looking at Black privileged people who are still confronting with this issue of what they
Hmm.
look like,
Right.
and so forth. And so that you have this class who's also seeing an aspect of we call it oppression,
Hmm.
consider what ordinary Black people and white people who are also going through. But then there's a different category, even to the
Hmm.
point of when you look at, Black workers, white workers, in terms of their income. There's a difference. And even now, this is the insanity of it, that the white workers who are supporting Trump, who oppose their fundamental interests, but yet they can't see the unity that they could have with Black workers. Is that,
Well, let me say a couple things about that, right? One, and and I'm sorry, but I'm going to start with another plug. My good friend and colleague Kenneth Warren at the University of Chicago and I have just finished a book that we're about to send to the press in the next couple of days. The title of which is "You Can't Get There from Here: Black Cultural Studies and the Evasion of Inequality." All right, so that's a plug. But I mentioned the book because an argument that we just made in the introduction is that the way that the nothing has changed um, narrative works is precisely by drawing on um, um, instances of and even what's the word I'm looking for? Domains of discrimination that well-off Black people confront, and positing a continuity between those that less well-off Black people confront. Um, and it's a nice rhetorical move, but what it does, though, and that's why. So I've been trying to figure out why trauma has become the kind of thing that it's become. And we realized in the course of working on its introduction that trauma is the glue that makes um, the murder of Emmett Till, the and the woman who just got shot in Springfield, Illinois, you might not being able to get a cab to take me uptown in Harlem 30 years ago. I'm sure I can get one now. And Oprah's handbag, right? Or Kamala is being dissed by somebody, all amount to the same thing, but they aren't the same thing, right? I mean, it's a nice move, right? I mean, they're the same thing in the sense that they arguably all stem from the same prejudicial attitudes, right? But as social behavior, they're not the same thing, right? Um, Kamala can go get somebody, right? And because some jerk off um, tries to attack her, well, it's certainly I mean, nobody argues that racism as an ideology is gone or that bigoted people no longer exist, right? Um, but 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 where we take that observation is what's key. And I don't think we can take it any place other than than the fact that there are assholes out there, um, but like that doesn't change the class character of of social relations among Black Americans or or class relations within the society more broadly.
I'm gonna, I have a ton of questions, but I want to bring
Mhm.
some of the other, see if we have some other questions.
Sure.
Are there any? I haven't been able to sort of manage the chat session. Brian, any questions that's
Well,
tapping?
Brian had some too, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's all right. I can help you out with that, Tony,
Okay.
and just tell the audience that the way to get online is to, well, you can either put your question in the chat like Rosemary just did, or you can go under more reactions and then raise your hand, and then we can get to your question. But I will jump the line since
Good.
you suggested it, Professor Reed. And would you like a question about politics or a question about organizing? I know they're related, but I'll take.
Either. Yeah, I mean, whatever.
Okay,
Lucia.
I'll ask one about organizing because I know that
Okay.
you often talk about the importance of doing work.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you if there's any organizations or coalitions or alliances for that matter who are doing the kind of organizing that you think can contribute to meaningful change, especially any organizations that you think that the peace movement should emulate.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. Um, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people out there doing good organizing, right? I mean, um, yeah, my dear late friend, and I'm sure a good friend of many people here, Jane McAlevey, made that point often uh, to stress the distinction between mobilizing and organizing. And what that comes down to basically is mobilizing is getting people who you're already in touch with to do stuff. And organizing is basically like connecting with people whom you don't know and who don't already agree with you about everything to try to move them. And I think that one of the things that's happened, again, over the last 30, 40 years, is that as the left has gone more deeply into retreat, and as more and more cohorts of young people have come up without access to any of that kind of history in in their lived experience, unless they're in a labor movement. The distinction between mobilizing and organizing has kind of vanished, basically, and people think they're organizing when they're mobilizing, and I think that's become an increasing problem as social media has enhanced the likelihood of being in of living within some kind of echo chamber, right? Where you don't talk to anybody who like doesn't already agree with you, and that shows up. And look, I can still barely now remember when I was a college activist. And the bottom line is that you've got more moral force, more piss and vinegar than you have analysis at that point. Um, and and righteousness is, righteous, but it only goes so far. Um, and so from that perspective, I mean, I think well, the most significant kind of organizing I see, but I don't go around the country looking for organizing either. I mean, don't get me wrong, is within the labor movement, because that's where, because unions don't exist without organizing, and the unions are also so. Look, I tell you, like this was probably more than 30 years ago. Like I was um, involved in a process with the old oil, chemical, and atomic workers when they were up before the mergers, before they merged out of existence. But they were trying to build a relationship with the various networks of the environmental justice movement. And I was involved in a process, frankly, for two reasons. One, as a prop to embody, the interest of the Labor Party in this process, right? Since I was kind of visibly identified for the Labor Party at that point, but also, frankly, as something like an Indian scout, to the extent that I was familiar with a lot of people and had shared histories with a lot of people from the environmental justice movement going back to the late '60s, and I was kind of I wouldn't say an interpreter, but but the leadership of the union thought that I had some insight I could offer. Well, at one point, one of the leaders of one of the networks started to mama the union president, understandably, about some really bad interactions they'd had with some locals, like in Alabama and maybe Louisiana. I think the ones in Louisiana were better. But anyway, what impressed me was what the president, Bob Wages, said. He said, "Look, yeah, I know, but a lot of these people are real assholes, and I'd rather not have to deal with them. But I don't hire them, right? Like the boss hires them, so I got to organize what the fuck the boss gives me, right? And that's not a problem that the EJ networks had, because the only people they had to organize really was their foundation grant officers." And so that introduces like another layer of problem and a contradiction in these movements. So does that help? Is that adequate?
It does. I would
Yeah,
like to
right.
follow up just because I know there's a lot of people in the audience, but you mentioned
Hmm.
college campuses and unions. That does get to one of the questions in the chat. I'm sure you saw just today or yesterday uh, many unions, including the United Auto Workers,
Hmm.
the flight attendants, the
Right,
service employees,
right,
and more, the painters
right.
even. Uh, uh,
UE, yeah,
yeah, they came out
yeah.
against this current policy of the Biden administration and most of the U.S. government on the war in Gaza, the ethnic
Hmm.
cleansing of Gaza that we're
Right,
seeing right
right,
now.
right,
And also, we've seen a massive amount of organizing on college campuses
right.
against this slaughter that we're seeing. Can
Hmm.
you comment on those efforts?
Well, I think the organizing's good, right? I think the protests are good. I mean, and I mean, it's like, um, look, yeah, I'm happy to see the expressions coming from the union movement, right? Um, and in particular, but also from college campuses. But I'm not trying to cheapen that. I mean, um, I'd be even happier if I didn't know the leadership of most of the unions who were involved in the protest, right? Uh, but but it also underscores too. I mean, you mentioned the painters. There's a real tendency um, for people to look at the building trades as though they were the building trades 120 years ago, right? I mean, they're very different now. I just don't see also, but it's impressive, right? But it's impressive not just because the leadership of those unions is prepared um, um, to put their necks on the block, basically, but they wouldn't be prepared to do it unless the members were also, right? And there's a lot of support among the members for it, and look, I mean, I know, like I've known a good friend of mine who went to Yale Law School after he finished his PhD. Um, said to me that both that he worked harder in any one seminar in the political science department as a grad student than he did in a whole semester of law school. But he also said that, look, what pricey law training is all about is to equip you to argue somewhat persuasively that what is clearly and manifestly X is somehow indeed really not X. And I know that it's not just lawyers, right? I mean, that's what pricey education is all about across the board. And I say that because I don't work in in global studies or in like international human rights or like international relations. And I know that there are very field specific ways that people parse terminology in the subfields. And I'm prepared to acknowledge just agnosticism about the possibility that there might be a significant distinction between labeling a mass slaughter of a population as genocide and labeling it as ethnic cleansing. I have no idea what the fuck it is that justifies that distinction, but well, whatever it is, and see, sometimes I think we could be helped if we could sort of goose the conversation away from the going abstractions, right? I mean, the going categorical terminology, and just take the extra time to like define it by the nature of the process. For instance, and I know this will never happen, but for a number of years now, I've been lobbying for not using the term gentrification anymore because that doesn't capture what the dynamic is, and it makes it look like the removal of an Aboriginal cultural population, when what it is publicly subsidized, privately appropriated, rent intensifying redevelopment. So it's a capitalist process, right? And in the same way, killing going on 40,000 people in Gaza. You can call it ethnic cleansing if that helps you sleep at night, or if you think it might help you get some absolution. You can call it genocide, which comes to my tongue more readily. But the point is, it's like the slaughter of 40,000 people with no end in sight. And Mark, and there's no one in the country probably who is more eloquent on that and its connection to the mounting danger of fascism, like in the United States and elsewhere, than the president of the American Postal Workers, my old friend and comrade Mark Demonstein. But yeah, I think it's a good, yeah. Well, it's great to see that. And it's going to be interesting to see whether there's any space open for Harris to differ, if only marginally, from Biden on that front. I'm not going to bet my fake pension on it, right?
Yeah, that wasn't one of my questions, but I don't want to make you speculate.
Okay.
And I do want to go over to David Abraham. Tony, I'm sorry.
Before you go there, so Professor Reed, you said that we don't have what it takes to turn the tide. And I as I think about it, because you also talked about the big victories of the 50s and the 60s,
Right.
and based on what those victories were at that moment, did we have what it take to turn the tide then compared to where we are now? And what's the difference considering what we have witnessed over the past 20 years, going back to Hurricane Katrina, up to this present point of us dealing with Gaza and so forth? What does it take to turn the tide, and what was it that we don't have now that we had then that gave us those
Right.
big victories?
Right. No, yeah, that's an important question too. And before I answer, like I want to respond to something else that you asked or made or a comment you made. See, I wouldn't think that it's so much a matter of white workers not being able to recognize their own interests. But my take on that is like the Democrats haven't been offering the working class, period, of whatever color in this country, right? I mean, anything except bubblegum and hard times since the Clintons, and they're always fresh out of bubblegum, right? I mean, the regions of the country where Trump and Trumpism have had their greatest successes are regions that have bottomed out, but right, where where the economy is hollowed out, and where people like that version of why am I blocking on his name? Um, Labor Secretary under Clinton, MIT.
Robert Wright?
Right. Yeah, was telling us all that we were going to ship the shitty jobs to Mexico and Trinidad, and we were all going to be symbolic analysts, right? Um, People's livelihoods have been hollowed out, but they're insecure, and everybody's given to understand that there are two vehicles through which to express their political concerns. I mean, so I mean, the Democrats haven't been offering anything to working people really, and the Republicans have filled the gap. I mean, my good friend Anthony Mazzocchi made this point back in the late '80s, and like the early '90s, that the neoliberal Democrats aren't capable of addressing the real needs of the working class. And if we, as progressives, as left, the labor movement, can't find ways to connect with people and to connect with their felt concerns and needs, and to demonstrate credible paths forward, then these horrible and dangerous forces in the country are going to do it. And that's happening here, the UK, France, Germany, wherever else, Austria, Belgium. So I mean that's the problem. Now, as to the question you asked now, institutional capacity, right? But that's something else that's happened, and I hold my age cohort, like the new left, partly responsible for this. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. That with the idea that you don't have to have an institutional politics, like you don't have to have organization, like you don't have to have organizational capacity, like you don't have to have program, like you don't have to have discipline to build a movement. That's just like conceding the game to the other side. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to be Leninists, but I am saying that the right wing looks a whole lot more like they've read Gramsci and Lenin than our side does, but we shouldn't have had to read them anyway, right? But it's just sort of common sense ways of thinking about what's necessary to build the kind of force that you need to create to move the needle. And the bottom line, and this takes us to the war question, it takes us to the environmental question, is that there's no alternative to having an anti-capitalist movement, right? Or a movement that rests at least on fundamentally anti-capitalist principles, right? Like if you think that we're going to see, I mean, two things that drive me crazy. A lot of things drive me crazy, more and more as I get older, of course. But two of them coming at the same time are tendencies within the environmental movement, right? Which is the one that's had the least that's had the least history of openness to an anti-capitalist class politics. But one is this idea catastrophism, right? I mean, eco-catastrophism. That's something to be gained from saying, if we don't solve the environmental crisis within 10 years, it's too late. Well, for anybody who's not stupid, like, you're not going to solve the environmental crisis in 10 years. So if I believe that, there's nothing for me to do except to figure out which is my favorite brand of top shelf Irish whiskey and just go get that and just sit and watch track and field and anybody other than Patriots, during football season. Uh, uh, but the other thing is the willingness, and it's bizarre to me that these two can come together so often. But the willingness to get seduced by technical fixes, and I think that's another function of like fancy education, or it can be, right? Not that it is necessarily, but it can be. But like carbon credits. So like when the carbon credit thing first started, I mean, my impulse is that there's something I don't understand that seems to be making sense to everybody else. Then I just need to do some more study to figure out what it is. But I could never understand how this carbon credits thing was supposed to reduce carbon emissions. And it fucking doesn't. Like, it's just another derivatives market, right? I mean, so like, I'm not saying that we have to overthrow capitalism to make serious advances in environmental protection. But we have to at least start out from an understanding that when Chevron saves a lagoon in City Park in New Orleans, it's bullshit, right? And it's a propaganda effort, right? And that corporation or capital will not. And this also means nation states that are bound to capitalist interests just aren't going to be capable of imposing the kind of regulation voluntarily that will be necessary. I mean, look at our billionaire class. These guys like Musk and Thiel, like, and the rest of them are so pampered. Like, if you ask them to pay a parking ticket, they start comparing it to forced march to Auschwitz, because it's so pampered by the idea that the world is theirs and government exists for them, and if it doesn't, then they'll pull it all down. So I mean, that's what. And we don't have a movement that's capable of doing anything like that. And see, another thing I have about us as Americans is that, so I mean, going back to the World Social Forum stuff, right? And even actually, this goes back to the Sixth Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam in '76. Always, if there's an international conference of like activist stuff, there are more Americans there than anybody else. And the relationship between the size of the American delegations and the depth and the seriousness of the movements that they supposedly represent is preposterous. But that's something else that we do, right? We want to find ways to feel good about who we are and what we're doing. And I'm sorry, this is a pure rant at this point, but I'll stop.
No, but there's a lot of truth in it. You mentioned Mr. Elon Musk. I don't know if carbon credits really work either, but I know that they helped make Mr. Elon Musk very, very rich.
There you go.
And he's now funneling that apparently to the Trump campaign.
Right.
I don't know if carbon credits work. It kind of seems to me like you're just shoveling the shit to a different corner of the room, but it's still in the room.
Right. Yeah, that's what it seems like to me.
Mary Ellen says in the chat, I just want to get this in, and then I will go to you, David, I promise. You were talking, and this gets back to, you mentioned your being of the new left. I know that highlighting the contradictions was a big part of that movement. You said when BP saves a lagoon, or Chevron, I think you said. We've had that here in Massachusetts. We saw Raytheon, obviously one of the biggest weapons producers in the world.
Right.
While they were causing a famine in Yemen, they were sponsoring the Walk for Hunger here in Boston.
Wow.
We're able to use that. We were able to use that, highlight that contradiction in a way that was very effective. And I think that's one aspect as well. But I've been threatening to do it for quite a while. So let's get to David.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay. Thank you for raising so many interesting threads. I want to address one of them, the question of what we had in the 60s that we don't have now. And it seems to me one of the things that we did have was a convergence between what one might call liberal and what might call social democratic impulses.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
you know, when Clinton and Clyburn go out and attack Sanders as they did, they want to destroy any ability to connect, I guess, what Nancy Fraser called the progressive side of neoliberalism, the identity politics, the progressive component of that, and do all that they can to prevent the kind of coalescence between social democratic, labor, working class demands and those portions of the professional middle class that might coalesce with them. So we see in Europe, for example, that there are moments when Greens and Social Democrats go into coalition. But here it seems that the goal of the liberals is to destroy the social democratic option rather than to find a way to win together with it. So is there any hope for that?
It doesn't look like it to me, man. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I was kind of surprised. I mean, because I think it really is. 2015, 2016, what I think marks a significant rupture or a point of clarification, right? Because all of a sudden, right? I mean, they made clear, right? The neoliberals made clear that to them, any stirring of a social democratic program, I'm not even talking about, turning Archer Daniels Midland into collective farms. I mean, but what was a greater danger than the threat of fascism? And it kind of makes sense. I've been reading a lot of Brecht, but I've had to console myself since 2015, because he was on top of it, right? I mean, he was on top of seeing the limits of that kind of liberalism. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And yes, I mean that was something that we had in the 60s. But so I'm in the process, well, I've been in the process for a while of trying to revisit that period too. Because as you know, like the war on poverty and the Great Society stuff was way more complex in its class content, right? Than even those of us who look back on it skeptically and were kind of critics of it from the left at that time. Were even clear then. I mean, like for instance, the invention of poverty as a way not to talk about economic inequality. The reduction of the understanding of racial inequality to a discrimination, right? Sort of change the nature of the game, and change the nature of the understanding. I'll tell you one other thing that what about the that late 60s moment I've always found humbling. I thought I was a really good organizer till the draft ended. And then I learned just how hard it is to organize.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah, but does
David.
that get at your comment?
Go ahead, David. Did that get at it?
No, the floor should go to other people.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thanks, David. Next, I want to bring up Michael. I'm going to add you to the screen. You just have to unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Hey, Professor Reed. First, just wanted to say, thank you for your writing. I actually grew up as a kid on welfare during the welfare reform in the 90s, and your writing kind of helped clarify a lot of things for me, especially when I became an adult. And especially with 2016, I also found the reaction to that very confusing.
I'll bet.
I don't think I would have been able to make sense of it without some of your
Where,
writing.
well, thank you. So where'd you grow up, by the way?
Oakland. I'm still in Oakland.
Okay.
Oakland,
Oh,
California.
okay. Cool.
Yeah. And I guess my question is, like I know you've been writing about like the threat of fascism and authoritarian neoliberalism, and I guess from talking to people, like either like I get a reaction of like I don't know, I feel like people like don't really believe it,
Hmm.
or um
Yeah.
or like the opposite reaction is like, people in my family who like believe it, but then kind of like catastrophize. And I guess I feel like that's not totally helpful either.
Hmm.
But yeah, I feel like a lot of people that I talk to just kind of like, I don't know, just kind of like sleepwalking through it and like don't really see it as that big of a threat. So I wonder what if that's like your experience or what you think about that.
Uh, yeah, thank you very much. And I want to say too, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but Oakland is the only place in California I really like. Uh, but I also know I can't. But I know now I couldn't afford to live there either. But um, yeah, I mean it's a common thing, and I mean part of it, I don't want to psychologize it too much, but I think part of it is like people just don't quite look like we've had like a half century now of Thatcherism being drummed into everybody's head, right? There's no such thing as society, only individuals and their families. The point, economics is a method, but the point is to change the human soul. And there's been so much of that stuff. And then coming from the ostensible left side, right? Like liberalism. So if Clintonism is what it is to be on the left, well, then we've got a real problem, right? And people um, don't quite well, and I've been tiptoeing around this, but I'll just say it. Um, a number of years ago, I discovered the term kayfabe, which is a state-of-the-art term in professional wrestling, and it's almost like a right-wing populist appropriation of Brechtian theater, right? Because it refers to the phenomenon of everybody who's involved in pro wrestling, fans, performers, promoters, everybody knows that it's fake, but there's an emotional um, satisfaction that comes from all of those who are involved colluding in treating it as though it were real. I mean, there's a great South Park episode where the boys are crawling around a wrestling ring talking about their time in Vietnam. Um, but, and there's something like that that goes on in the culture more broadly. So, and it's like, and it's on our side as well as the other side, right? Like, well, why the fuck am I supposed to care what Cardi B thinks of Joe Biden, for instance, right? So, like, we're all encouraged, like, to live in this world that we kind of understand as being not being a real world, but being something else. I'm not close enough to it to know how to explain it. I just got my first iPhone last Thursday, right? And I didn't want to get a cell phone at all before that, but I got forced to by an organizing project. So I'm not on top of the culture, as it were. Um, but that's part of it. What I think, and kind of look at desperation. It's like if your house gets dirty enough, right, over time, then you can't really figure out where to dig in to start trying to clean it, right? Um, so I think there's something like that going on. But and now this is like just I mean this is pure old person talk. But it just seems like there's so much noise in the society now, right? I mean, so much bullshit noise that it kind of gets in the way of people's thinking. And there's also this problem that, and I almost said this before, but that if you recognize, like you say, your family members do, what the dangers are, where do you turn to try to do something about it? And there's no place to turn. I mean, a while ago, and I've been kind of putting off making this connection for a lot longer than is probably healthy. But I figured out that the pace at which the right is able to move, and its comparison to the pace at which we have to move to build the kind of movement that we need and haven't had. And snarky me will say that I've been saying this for 30 years, and people have been saying to me, the dangers are so great that we don't have the time to do that kind of deep organizing. To which I would say, well, the reason the dangers are so great now is they haven't been doing it for the last 40 years. So we got to start doing it. And it might be. So I finally faced up, less than a year ago, to the reality that we can't really generate the kind of institutionalized political force that we need to forestall an authoritarian putsch, right, of whatever sort. And so that cause for despair could be. The other possibility, and a comrade of mine pointed this out to me that I could see it as a possibility, is that what we can do at a minimum is just kind of leave some sort of record for when we come out the other side of a right-wing order, and there are people starting to look around to try to find fissures, to crack open to organize against it, like say Brazil after 1985 or 6 or whatever. And that's not a lot to be hopeful for, especially if it's somebody who's as old as I am, because I won't see it. But what we can do, and by the way, I mean, what I made of Stalingrad, what I referenced before we started, well, when I worked in the Sanders campaign in 2016, I worked with a lot of the enthusiastic young people, those who would later go on and join DSA. And and some of them totally understandable, but we're living and dying on like every poll, right, from every primary state. So I know half of them probably wanted to kill me, but I kept banging them with the story of Sergeant Pavlov right at the Battle of Stalingrad. Like he and 40 soldiers held a building against like multiple Nazi assaults for over a month. And I tell them, like, they didn't know what was going on right on the riverbank. They didn't know what was going on in the tank factory or in the tractor factory. The only thing that they knew was that they had to hold that fucking building, and they held it. And your job is to do what you need to do to try to deliver South Carolina or Wisconsin or Stony Brook, wherever the hell you are. So there's a way of thinking about politics and thinking about political action that's important for us all to learn. And that's another way I think the labor movement is invaluable as a source of experience of that sort. But also, like, well, what that means is, well, we actually aren't looking to build a mass movement now or a mass-based left. I think what the main objective is now to identify and to mobilize and connect cadre who from all around the country who will be part of continuing the work to try to build that movement, while at the same time we do whatever we have to do to keep the wolf at bay, right? I mean, so I mean that's why, and I don't know, like this was happening like before the debate too, but people who never wanted to vote for Biden, and for good reasons, there are great reasons not to want to vote for Biden, but we're having a lot of difficulty accepting, right, that you can approach the election pragmatically, right? When in 2016, right, I wrote a piece in Common Dreams that was kind of a response to the Never Hillary voters, and it took the same kind of point, like you're, yeah, I mean, the vote's not your chastity, right? And I mean, yeah, sometimes there's nothing to do but take a moral stand. But those moments when there's nothing to do except take a moral stand are moments of defeat, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody else is old enough to recall, but there was like a cartoon going around offices in the 70s and maybe the early 80s that showed a little mouse, cartoon mouse, with its back to the viewer, throwing up a finger at a hawk that's about to pounce on it. Yeah, I like to think I would do that right at that moment too, but that's not defeating the hawk, right? That's just my act of desperation in my defeat, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, good luck, man. Yeah. So what are you doing now, by the way?
Uh, I mean,
Are
I
you
work.
working in Oakland?
Yeah, I work in Oakland. I'm just like a tech worker, so but I do some like organizing with like the local like bus union actually. We wrote a piece in
Hmm.
Labor
Oh,
Notes
oh yeah,
last
yeah,
month or something, so about the AC transit workers, but my day job is just tech stuff, so
right. Yeah, yeah. If you want, you can send me an email at my
Yeah.
well, but I'm still on the website at Penn.
I
oh,
don't,
okay, cool.
Send it
I
over
don't,
to
I
us
don't,
too. We'll send it out to the registrants, Michael. Tony.
Oh, pardon me.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I don't know if I'm looking at the reach and get some of your scotch, or I'm getting depressed. But one one of the things that I keep thinking about is the Middle Passage in terms of the conditions that enslaved African people were under, coming through that journey.
hmm
And yet they still were very hopeful to produce where we are today. And I'm struggling, we don't, we don't have what it takes, to turn the tide. And my feeling is that, I think we do. The question is, how do we organize it? Because there is, actions all over this country, battlefronts over this country that we have no idea that people are resisting to the level they're resisting. And how do
hmm
we align that? What is that these fragmentations of resistance
hmm
and movements to build that capacity, and how do we remain hopeful in doing that? Otherwise, we're just gonna have to, sip that scotch and watch some reruns of some old films or something. But
Well, I tell you something, man. Like, one day a few years ago, speaking of the old films, just on a lark, one one day I watched The Organizer, the Italian film, right, with Marcello Mastroianni, the Battle of Algiers, Z, and State of Siege, all
mhm,
in one day. And one thing that struck me was that every one of those films ends with a defeat and with a crushing defeat. But each one in its currency was considered by leftists to be a wildly or greatly inspiring, wildly optimistic film. Why? Because the state of politics at that point, what was it? We believed that bad defeat could be prefatory to the next victory. And I don't think that we have that kind of left anymore, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons for it. I mean, and that's not at all to say that we don't have leftists out there who think like that and try to agitate
mhm,
like that. But protests now are more episodic, and in a way, like protest movements are kind of by nature episodic, right? Um, and a real problem with the left in the U.S. again, at least until the '60s, I think, or since the '60s, I think we can write a lot of it off. Yeah, I mean, the anti-communism, and especially when talking to academic leftists, every time I use the word like discipline, right, somebody starts accusing me of Stalinism, um, which I've now come to understand is just a way of being anti-Marxist, basically. But um, but part of what's got to happen is that we got to cultivate that way of thinking about politics, right, among people. And I think there's also a lot to be said for the need to do to lace our political organization efforts, and this is what we're doing with Debs Jones Douglas Institute, and also with the podcast, to link them to sort of training and or cultivation of critical thinking, right? Following arguments, right, and I mean making them, right, but evaluating and assessing at kind of the if P then Q level, right? But because the weight of like I mentioned before about argument through tossing large abstract categories back and forth is what the ruling class wants us to do, right? That's how they want us to think about stuff, right? So they want us to think, and like this has been true for the entirety of post-war American academic life. And look, I was a political science and soc major in the late 1960s, so I knew this, but not in a deep and visceral way that I understand now how central the social sciences were, and also history to some extent up to a point, in making class disappear as a category of thought in American intellectual life. But the sociologists turned class into some bullshit about the kind of stuff you have in your living room, right? So what I'm saying is that there's a lot of work to be done just to try to have the proper arguments that we need to have to make the challenges that might have some impact on altering the terms of political debate. And I'm not ready to go get that Irish whiskey yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any other questions, Brian, but I was very inspired when I saw what the students was doing around Gaza, and particularly the students from Emerson, when they were being surrounded by the police, and their level of, number one, standing their ground, protecting each other, and moving against people who are getting ready to hurt them. That took a lot of, that showed me they have courage. This young generation have courage. What that turned into, what that new level of group of cadre of young students do, hopefully we'll find ways, solutions to some of these particular problems. Even students on my own campus who one came in my office and was crying. The next thing I know, he's leading the student movement because of what has happened. And he got arrested. And he had to, when he got out of jail, he had to go back to work. And then I had to pick him up to take him to court. So I'm saying is that we have to project the possibility, the new possibility of victory and hope in order to inspire not just those who are on the front lines, but those who are coming after them, as well as some of us who are senior citizens now, to continue to, support that and encourage that behavior, because I think we're in a better position now than we were in the 50s and the 60s. I mean, that's my, from what I see,
Well, if we can keep the fascists from taking over the country, we might be.
But think about it. What when we were enslaved, what was that condition?
Well, I was never enslaved, so I don't know, bro.
Well, I'm just saying. Well, we that's debatable. We still, based on what you're saying, in some ways we're still enslaved. But when people were enslaved, they still resisted, though.
Well,
and at this point.
Yeah, but I think that wherever there's oppression, there's going to be resistance. I know it's a cliche, but nobody likes being oppressed. But I mean, the thing is, look, I mean, no matter how courageous we are, no matter how firm we are, no matter how righteous we are, if we don't have the institutional wherewithal to fight, then they're going to run over us. And that's just the way it is. And I'm not by any means suggesting that's not a reason to fight. I mean, like I always told undergraduates who wanted to come and do this line of work, that if you want to do it, you have to think like a Major League Baseball player, where if you're successful, 3 times out of 10 you go to the Hall of Fame, because fighting on this side, you're going to lose a hell of a lot more than you win.
That's a good point. Managing expectations, I think, is really important, especially because burnout is a big problem among activists. And if you don't set those expectations correctly and realize that this is a lifelong fight, I mean, the fight that we have against militarism, it's not going in.
Right. No.
It has to be a lunch pail job, day in, day out. It's not, the problem isn't going away. It has to be resisted daily. And that's the message we have to give to new people getting involved, so they know what they're getting into.
Yep, absolutely. There's no quick victory, God, especially in a struggle against. So when I lived in Chicago, I was like the co-chair of the Chicago Coalition for New Priorities, and we did the swords and the plowshares thing every month. And actually, we were close to the Boston group too, but we also worked very closely with Peace Action. And I mean, what the hell? You got to stop it, and it's getting harder and harder now, because this is another problem with the left in the U.S. Like, I don't know how this happened either, but that way too many people who identify as being on the left are way too inclined to accept the national security apparatus as what a definition of rogue states and bad states and the need for regime change, and that's another thing that's just kind of shocked me shitless over the last decade. In fact, I wrote an article in Common Dreams about imperialism a few years ago, because it's just shocking. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, it's really scary. I think the on the left, people who some folks who would say they're on the left are liberals. They've become enamored with this idea of humanitarian interventionism.
Right.
One example that I often go to is the lengths that George W. Bush made to argue that Iraq was a threat, and we had to defend ourselves for that regime change. When it came time for Barack Obama to make the argument to depose Gaddafi in Libya, they didn't even try and make that argument. We were there to save those people. Now look at it. Right. And that was in less than 10 years that changed.
Yeah. It's frightening. It's a reminder, right? I mean, that how much of an uphill fight this is, and how it's connected to economic interests all the way through too, right? I mean, like when I read Adam Tooze's book, on the Great Recession, I was kind of humbled, right, at the intricacies of the different sectors of the global financial sector, and how it was all connected to breaking down the governments. I mean, a buddy of mine, Mark Dudzik, had what I think was a great analysis of the Greek question, which is, he said, so when Syriza appealed to the Troika for some relief, right, a payback schedule, Mark said, it's like you go to the loan shark, and he has 2 options. He can either extend the terms of the loan and get more and more juice from you over time, or he can decide to break both your arms and make an example of you. So when you go into the lunchroom, everybody else sees what happens if you fuck with the loan shark. And that's pretty clearly what the Troika wanted to do to Greece, and they did it. And I know it's not military, and this is something we haven't talked about, but the emergence of the NATO left over the last 3 or 4 years is one of the most I never would have imagined that when I was 15, even, right? I mean, that early, but how can there be, uh, uh, how can support for NATO and left come up in the same sentence? But here we are.
Tony, back to you. Where should we go with it? We've had you for about an hour and 40 minutes. How are you doing on time, Professor Reed?
I'm okay. I can give you another 15 to make it symmetrical.
Nick had his hand up. I don't know if Nick had a question.
Nick, why don't you unmute yourself and come on up?
Hi. Professor Reed, thanks for coming to speak with us. I have a question about electoral politics. I know one of your favorite phrases is that the electoral realm is where the left consolidates wins, like already made in the realm of social movements.
Right.
And obviously the distinction between mobilizing and organizing is well taken. I'm in Boston DSA, and a lot of people seem to want to skip the social movement part and go straight to mobilizing for electoral races.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, since that energy is already there anyway, how do you think whatever small left exists today can most effectively use political races where they happen? And in the cases where, local elections are won, how does individual leftists most effectively use that power?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think it varies, right? I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but I mean, I don't think that we're going to elect our way into a takeover of the Democratic Party, or that we're going to elect our way to anything anywhere near the degree of institutional reform that we need to have. I mean, the Justice Democrats strategy, which has a lot of people excited, really it is a low-hanging fruit, strategy, right? But there's probably not any more than 20 or 30 congressional seats around the country where that approach can apply. And as Jamal Bowman's case showed, that's a vulnerable one too. So, I mean, is your hand up? Oh,
no. Continue.
So yeah, I don't oppose running people for office. I mean, I just think it's a more of an instrumental, or one should approach it more instrumentally than I think a lot of people are inclined to do. But what's funny, when one of the DSA socialists was elected to the Chicago City Council, a woman from the Rogers Park, the northeasternmost ward. What the Nation wrote a glowing article about it, and what a great victory this was. And I just wrote a letter saying, you know what? I lived in Chicago when her predecessor was elected 30 years ago, and he was elected on the same basis that she was elected. Right, and 2 or 3 terms later, he's in the hip pockets of all the developers. Because there's an organizing effect that the political institutions have, right? Like if you want to get anything passed for your district, you got to log roll with other people who don't share your politics. You either have to attack the developers or find some way to come to terms with them. If you attack them too much, you're going to lose allies on other stuff. And I think people just there's so much of a tendency to look for shortcuts, right? And to imagine an easy way to get to where we're trying to get to, and there just isn't one. But again, that's not to say that one shouldn't get behind promising local elections or whatever, depending on issues and on forces involved.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think Jeffrey had his hand up also.
Let me get you in. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've been waiting for so long for the task to. First off, I like the presentation. First, sorry, I'm high functioning autistic, so
Okay.
get you understand those kind of people, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And all right. First
Some in my family.
oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
sweet. I'm from Fresno, California, by the way.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
Central Valley. Anyway, I was first question is do you think you could share your contact with me, because I probably funny, but I always kind of like a private political science teacher, since I obviously can't get I literally can't get one at the college I go to
Oh, wow.
since they literally think of me as a threat, as a danger.
Oh,
They don't
shit.
even see they don't, I'm not danger. I just said some stuff that made me seem dangerous.
Okay,
It hurts just to bring up that past.
right.
I almost I almost shedded a tear right there. I
Sorry.
wasn't joking. Anyway, my big question is, I'm not trying to judge. I'm not trying to be offensive about what you said about the authoritarian neoliberalism,
Mm-hmm.
liberalism, but from what I saw from the movie Bad Faith, I think the Christian nationalists are the bigger threat to America's democracy. After all, they're more active. They're more active than what I've seen from the neoliberal authoritarian neoliberalism. So
Mm-hmm.
who do you think is the biggest threat to America's freedom, justice, and democracy? Christian nationalism, authoritarian neoliberalism,
Mm-hmm.
or someone or something else? This this question can apply to everyone, and not just you, but Tony, Brian, even everyone here
Mm-hmm.
here. So
Well,
what?
yeah, it's a good question, man. Look, I think if by authoritarian neoliberals you mean um, the Trumpists and the Heritage Foundation and ECRU, they're basically, the same as the Christian nationalists, right? I mean, they're all what I mean. They've formed a movement, right? And they formed a movement that's organic in the sense that people like Trump, who don't believe in shit, right? I mean, Trump doesn't believe in anything. Will caters to the Christian nationalists, and they could be like shock troops, right? A couple of my friends and I were until Sunday um, putting bets on like who was going to go in the night of the long knives, but a lot of them will. Well, a lot of the Christian nationalists will. But no, I mean they're absolutely. But if that's what you mean by authoritarian neoliberals, then I think, yeah, I mean I think they're the equal threat because they're part of the same tendency and the same movement.
If that's the case, then they should combine themselves, like combine the Christian nationalism and authoritarianism and create a new type of name, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
probably so.
yeah.
And they'll probably do it after they win, if they win.
That's why. That's why I'm working on becoming president myself, so I could stop these kind of people and truly drain the swamp. In fact, I even came up with a law idea that can actually help with this.
Yeah.
It's called the democracide, or in other words, crimes against democracy, which it passed.
Right.
Anything that's anyone who's committing crimes against democracy can be arrested because that's a big threat.
Yeah.
Big threat. That
Yeah. Thank you.
and that I
Thank
did
you,
mention
Jeff.
about the president thing, right? That want to run for president.
Yep.
We'll keep you in mind, Jeffrey.
Yep.
Oh,
Once
okay.
you-
Sorry. Sometimes get
Could
carried
certainly
away.
do worse.
Yeah. Yeah. That's then once you turn
Oh.
35, right? Because I take it
Yeah.
you're not that old yet.
I'm 32.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm planning to run when around 2050.
Okay. Well, what's your last name?
Bark Dull.
Okay. I don't know why I'm asking. I'll be dead by 2050.
But will you support? But do you think you'll support me in spirit?
Absolutely. If I have a spirit.
Why do you say that?
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Well,
I want to get over to Mary Ellen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Sometimes
No,
I get
no.
carried away.
yeah. No, it's
Question.
fine. Thanks a lot.
That was a great question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mary Ellen.
Thanks much, Jeffrey.
Hold on, you gotta unmute yourself, Mary
Yeah.
Ellen. There you are.
Thanks. We were at cross purposes. So hi, great to see
Hi,
you,
how you
Dr.
doing?
Reed.
Likewise.
Very well, thank you. Thanks again for this wonderful webinar. I do have a question. I'm going to try to be succinct. So, I mean, I completely hear you on the the stark reality of what we're facing. But at some point, I do think that we, while we're immersed in these realities and the day-to-day fight, we also need to, I think, give people something, a vision to hope for. And one of the things, I don't know if you realize this or how many people realize this, but apparently AOC is getting a lot of shit lately for being with Biden and all these various other things, not saying ceasefire, et cetera. But one of the things that I did appreciate about her in the beginning was her work on the Green New Deal, and she was very articulate back in the day, articulating a vision of what our society could be like, if we had a just transition and whatnot, things of that nature. And now, is this going to be a question? Yeah. So along those lines, I know that Robert Pollin had been involved in grassroots organizing. Robert Pollin at Perry Institute at UMass Amherst. He'd been very involved in the organizing on the ground in West Virginia. And I just want to sort of open it up to ask and maybe have you elaborate on the fact that, or the idea that that's a sort of grassroots organizing that could not simply, keep the wolf out of the barn or whatever the metaphor is, but also give people something to aspire for, and maybe diffuse the animosity, the racial animosity that I definitely see around where I live, and anti-gender, anti-queer animosity, and all that other stuff that really is fueling the right. So anyhow, there you go.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I mean, that's what what we do at Debs Jones Douglas mainly is political education trainings, like for union workers. And that's what we kind of hinge it on, right? I mean, the whole point is one of the things that really got to us during the pandemic was how much visceral anti-government sentiment there is out there. And it's been stoked, right? It's been stoked by the other side. And part of what we're about, and we've been in touch with Bob Pollin about this kind of stuff a lot right over the years, especially around just transition, but other stuff too, is like to encourage thinking about the common good or the public good, right? And when I made a reference to kind of skewing our trainings, right? I mean, not just to provide information, but to cultivate critical thinking. That's kind of the direction we're going with it, right? So yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's what we got to do. And see, that's another reason that I say you can't do it. That electoral engagement can't carry the load, right? Because you need to have that different kind of contact with people. So yeah, totally, absolutely with you.
You got to unmute yourself. I know you put your hand back up, so I think you got to follow up.
Oh, I didn't mean to. It's actually lowered on my thing. So anyhow, no, I'm finished. But thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the
chat.
Do you have any final words for us?
No, just thank you, and I look forward to working with you guys when I move up there.
Yeah, really? You're moving up here?
Yeah.
When?
It'll be about a year, but it'll be out west. Right? I'm more anchored in the western part of Massachusetts. Yeah.
Tony,
okay, good.
Tony, do you have some final thoughts for us?
No, I appreciate you. I think it's
likewise, brother.
Mary Ellen says that we gotta find a lot of solutions.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks again, and thanks to everybody, including Harris, for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation greatly. Take care. And like I've been, so this is an old man's thing. Like I lost my pair of glasses this morning between here and my bedroom. Couldn't figure out where the fuck they were. And of course, I have 4 or 5 pairs of glasses. So when I came in here and moved a little bag of paper clips, I picked up and found them. But I just couldn't figure out where they could have gone. And here I am. So
you never know.
Well,
yeah,
You
I hope
never
I find
know.
my
You never
glasses.
know where you'll find change.
No, that's exactly right.
Well, thank you for your time, Professor
Take care.
Reed.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be
Thank
sending
you
out a
all.
recording and a follow-up to everyone tomorrow.
Great.
Please share it widely.
Oh, wow. Thanks much. And we'll be in touch.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Oh, hey, Brian, is that a Lebanese flag behind you?
No, everybody always thinks that. That is the
Well,
flag
the
of New England.
The flag of what?
New England.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess I better learn it.
And the pine tree is for peace. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Excellent.
All right. Take care.